The girl didn't knock. She just appeared on Logan's porch one bitter winter night, bruised barefoot, and silent like some unspoken truth the darkness had decided to deliver. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for help. She just looked at him with eyes too old for her age. That's when Cooper stood tail rigid, as if he too understood this wasn't just a lost child. This was the start of something much deeper, something neither war nor silence could ignore. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The winter in Hollow Springs came quietly, like an old friend slipping through the back door, unannounced yet expected. Snow had not yet fallen, but the air was heavy with its scent, cold, clean, and watchful. This town, nestled in a crooked valley of Oregon, was the kind of place where secrets didn't stay hidden, but they also rarely rose to the surface unless disturbed. On the far edge of this town, in a modest cedar cabin that bore the fading paint of forgotten summers, lived Logan Reed. Logan was 38, broad-shouldered and silent, not by choice, but by consequence. His hair was dark brown and cut short with military precision, though streaks of silver had begun to show near the temples. He moved with calculated effort, seated permanently in a matte black wheelchair built for rugged terrain. Years ago, he had been a staff sergeant in the Air Force until a crash landing in Syria snapped his spine and scarred his throat with shrapnel, leaving his voice a fragile echo of what it once was. He spoke rarely now, not because he couldn't, but because the words felt heavier than silence. Beside him, as constant as breath, was Cooper. Cooper was a 7-year-old golden retriever, large-framed and golden like wheat in August, with deep brown eyes that saw more than they let on. Unlike many service dogs who carried the weight of their work with stoicism, Cooper carried it with warmth. His gait was graceful, his ears alert, and he had a sensitivity that bordered on the spiritual. He understood Logan not through commands, but through pauses, glances, and the briefest tensing of a finger. What war had taken from Logan Cooper had helped return not through healing, but through companionship. That night, the wind whispered through the trees outside the cabin, rustling dead pine needles against the wooden siding. Logan had dozed off in his chair by the fireplace, a worn patchwork blanket draped across his lap. Cooper lay at his feet, his breathing slow and steady. The old clock above the mantel ticked forward indifferent. And then Cooper lifted his head. His ears flicked once, twice. He stood without a sound and moved to the front window, tail low, but swaying gently. A soft whimper, almost inaudible, drifted in from outside. Logan stirred as Cooper let out a short, low whoof, the kind he reserved for the uncertain. Logan wheeled himself over, his movements fluid from years of practiced necessity. Outside, dim moonlight bathed the porch. There, curled beside the door in a thin sweatshirt, 2 sizes too big, was a child. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her hair was long and matted, a dirty blonde that might have once caught the sun. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees, and her right cheek was swollen with a bruise that had bloomed into violet and blue. Her name, though Logan didn't know it yet, was Ellie Monroe. Ellie had moved into the house next door just 3 weeks earlier, along with her legal guardian, her uncle Greg Monroe. The man was known in town for his reclusive nature, having returned to Hollow Springs after over a decade away. He rarely made eye contact, and though he was polite enough, something about him felt unfinished. Logan had only seen the man once, hauling groceries in one arm and dragging Ellie along with the other. That single interaction had left a bad taste in his mouth. Cooper, too, had stiffened when the man passed. Now Ellie sat shivering in the porch light, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that only children know how to carry. When Logan opened the door, Cooper didn't bark. He simply stepped forward, nuzzling her hand once, before sitting beside her still and calm. Ellie looked up at Logan but said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. She just stared. Logan motioned slowly, wordlessly, to invite her in. She hesitated, then rose with the wobble of someone unused to warmth. Inside, Logan guided her to the worn couch near the fireplace. Cooper followed, curling beside her like a golden guardian. Logan fetched a wool blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She accepted it with a small nod, her lips pressed tightly together. In the kitchen, Logan poured her a glass of water. When he returned, Ellie had fallen asleep, curled beside Cooper, one hand buried in his thick fur. That same night across town, Sheriff Donna Keller parked her cruiser outside the Monroe residence. She was in her early 40s with a commanding presence sharpened by years of work in law enforcement. Her auburn hair was always tied back in a tight braid, and her gray uniform bore the weight of a badge that had weathered both bureaucracy and broken people. Donna had once been high school classmates with Logan. They'd shared a quiet understanding since he returned home, broken not by war, but by what followed. Earlier that evening, the sheriff's office had received a report of a possible break-in at the Monroe house window, shattered drawers overturned. But when Donna knocked, no one answered. She circled the property with her flashlight, noting footprints in the frost. She also saw a trail of something else, dried drops of blood leading away from the back door. Back at the cabin, Logan sat quietly by the fire, watching Ellie sleep. He didn't need to know the details, not yet. The way she clutched Cooper, the way her fingers twitched in restless fear said enough. He knew trauma when he saw it. It had a shape, a rhythm, a smell. Cooper ever so gently lifted his head and nudged Logan's knee. Logan placed his hand on the dog's head. They both knew this night wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Morning crept into Hollow Springs on a bed of silver mist. The trees outside Logan's cabin stood still and brittle in the pale light, their branches frozen in a kind of quiet anticipation. Inside, the fire had gone out, but the warmth lingered, a combination of old embers, thick blankets, and the steady breath of a golden retriever curled beside a child. Ellie Monroe hadn't moved much since Logan had carried her to the couch. She was still wrapped in the wool blanket, her small form barely rising with each breath. Her bruised cheek had darkened overnight, and her lower lip bore the faintest crack of dried blood. Logan watched her from the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of black coffee he had yet to sip. Cooper lay between them, his head resting on his paws, ears tilted slightly back in constant awareness. Ellie stirred just after 7 a.m., blinking slowly, like someone waking from a place they didn't want to return to. When she saw Logan, her eyes widened, but when she spotted Cooper, her shoulders relaxed just a little. The dog stood and stepped forward, tail wagging gently. He nudged her hand, and she reached for him without thinking, her fingers tangling in his fur. Logan wheeled closer, offering her a glass of warm milk. She took it without speaking. Her silence was not out of stubbornness, it was instinctual, a shield built over time. He recognized it the way a fellow soldier might recognize a limp in another man's walk. After a few quiet minutes, Logan typed something on the tablet he used to communicate when his voice failed him. He turned the screen toward Ellie. "Would you like to stay here a little longer?" She hesitated, then nodded once. By mid-morning, Logan had placed a call to Hollow Springs Child Protective Services. The woman who answered was named Marla Givens, and her voice was sharp and efficient, the kind of voice that had little room for emotion. She explained the process with clinical clarity. Unless the child is in immediate physical danger or gives verbal testimony of abuse, we cannot remove her from the custody of her legal guardian. You can file a report, Mr. Reed, but she may have to return home in the meantime. Logan felt the pit open in his chest, but he said nothing. He ended the call with a short tap, then rolled back into the living room where Ellie was now seated upright, Cooper's head in her lap. Cooper suddenly stood. His nose twitched, and he moved toward Ellie's coat, which had been slung over the arm of the couch. With a careful nudge, he began sniffing the pocket tail still. Logan raised an eyebrow but remained still as the dog gently tugged at the lining. A small piece of paper crinkled in his mouth. Cooper brought it to Logan and dropped it into his lap. The page was torn and creased, drawn on with a blue marker in the awkward strokes of a child. It showed a square house stairs and underneath a box-shaped room. In the center were block letters, uneven but clear, help. Logan looked at Ellie, who had pulled her knees up again, her face unreadable. He turned the tablet back to her. "What is this?" She said nothing, only looked away. Logan took a photo of the drawing and sent it immediately to Sheriff Donna Keller along with a message. "You need to see this." Half an hour later, Donna was knocking on Logan's door. She wore her standard field jacket and forest green duty pants, her sheriff's badge slightly scuffed at the edges. Her face was hard this morning, not unfriendly, but weathered. She had seen worse than bruised children, but that never meant it hurt any less. Donna glanced at Ellie, who quickly turned away, and then looked at Logan, who simply handed her the drawing. She studied it for a long time, her brows tightening. "You think this is a basement?" she asked quietly. Logan nodded, then pointed to the word, "Help." I got a gut feeling about Monroe from the beginning," she said, sighing. "But nothing that stuck. Until now." Tucking the drawing into a protective sleeve, she stepped outside to make a call. Logan watched her from the window as she stood with one hand on her hip, eyes scanning the tree line as if the answer might be lurking between the trees. Later that afternoon, Donna returned with a large manila folder worn from age and travel. She placed it on Logan's table and opened it carefully. Inside were photos, handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, evidence from a case 5 years old. Her name was Jessica Voss. Donna said, laying out a picture of a smiling girl with frizzy red hair and glasses too big for her face. 9 years old, vanished one September evening on the west side of town. No suspects, no body, just gone. Logan scanned the files. A photograph of a house. The same property where Greg Monroe now lived. Her uncle had rented the place at the time. Donna continued. His name, Raymond Whitt. Guess who Greg Monroe bought that house from? Changed hands a year after the girl went missing. Logan's jaw tightened. The pieces were no longer scattered, they were starting to align. Meanwhile, Cooper had not left Ellie's side. She had begun whispering to him when she thought no one could hear. Little things, names, colors, memories. Logan noticed she traced shapes on his fur with her fingers as if writing stories no one else could read. That night, as Logan helped her into a clean sweatshirt and placed a bowl of soup in front of her, she looked up at him with more directness than before. "Will I have to go back?" she asked, voice hoarse but clear. Logan blinked, then shook his head slowly. He didn't need the tablet this time. No. The Hollow Springs Courthouse was a modest building of weather-stained red brick, built more for function than grandeur. On most days, its courtrooms dealt with parking violations, property disputes, and the occasional custody battle. But today was different. The parking lot buzzed with murmurs. Reporters from the local channel lingered near the courthouse steps, and the air held that strange charge that came before a storm. Only this storm was legal, emotional, and deeply personal. Inside Courtroom 2A, Logan Reed sat in his wheelchair near the defendant's table, his posture upright despite the tension that weighed down the entire room. He wore a plain navy button-up and khaki slacks, clean, but clearly chosen with practicality over polish. His hands rested calmly on his thighs, though the slight twitch in his right index finger betrayed the storm behind his composure. Cooper sat beside him, upright, alert, tail curled around his paws, golden fur immaculate under the overhead lights. He didn't fidget. He didn't blink. He simply watched. Across the aisle sat Greg Monroe, Ellie's legal guardian and accuser. He was a wiry man in his early 50s with thinning black hair combed aggressively forward to hide a balding crown. His pale skin had the stretched tautness of someone who lived under constant self-control, and his eyes were small, watery, always shifting. He wore a dark gray suit that didn't quite fit his frame, like a borrowed disguise that didn't belong to the man inside. His mouth curled downward, permanently, pressed into a shape that seemed both smug and afraid. Next to him sat Clara Denton, his attorney, a local lawyer in her early 40s, known for her sharp tongue and sharper heels. She was short, slim, with jet black hair pinned tightly at the nape of her neck and a voice that carried like steel under velvet. Clara thrived on technicalities and loopholes, for her cases were puzzles, not people. At the bench sat Judge Helen Whitlock, a woman in her late 60s with ash-blonde hair cut into a bob, glasses perched low on her nose, and a stare that could still silence an entire room. She'd presided over Hollow Springs Court for more than 2 decades and had seen every variety of human ugliness. Her robes hung loose around her slight frame, but her presence was undeniable, sharp, focused, impatient with nonsense. Behind Logan, seated with a social worker, was Ellie. She wore a soft pink hoodie, the sleeves slightly too long, her hands hidden inside. Her hair had been brushed that morning, and a small blue butterfly clip held her bangs back from her face. She looked younger than her 8 years and more tired. Next to her was Miriam Rowe, a CPS agent in her late 30s, with kind eyes, a wide frame, and a motherly presence. She had a voice that always ended in soft tones, designed to soothe and reassure, even in places like courtrooms. Clara Denton stood and addressed the room, her voice crisp. "Your Honor, we are here today to address a very serious matter. Mr. Logan Reed, while perhaps well-intentioned, is accused of illegally detaining a minor and allowing his animal to threaten her legal guardian, Mr. Monroe. There is also the concern that the child may have been coached or manipulated." Judge Whitlock raised a brow. "Manipulated. This is an 8-year-old girl, Ms. Denton. We only ask that we proceed carefully, Your Honor," Clara replied smoothly, "and that we recognize the danger of assigning motive based on emotional assumptions." Donna Keller, seated behind the prosecutor's table, said nothing. She had chosen not to represent the case in full, but had insisted on being present. She watched Logan carefully. He hadn't spoken a word since entering the room, and neither had Ellie. The proceedings went on for 30 minutes. Procedural language testimony about the night Ellie arrived at Logan's cabin. Greg Monroe's version of events, most of it rehearsed and empty. He painted himself as a misunderstood guardian dealing with a troubled niece and a war veteran neighbor who had grown overly protective. Then it happened. Ellie shifted in her seat. Cooper's head turned. Logan's fingers moved subtle thumb inward, palm flat, a slight twitch of 2 fingers. The signal. Cooper stood with deliberate grace. The bailiff started forward, but Judge Whitlock raised a single finger. Let him proceed. Gasps rippled as Cooper padded across the courtroom. Not rushed, not aggressive. Each step was placed with quiet resolve. He reached Ellie and paused. She looked down, blinking once. Cooper lowered his head and gently nudged her hoodie pocket. Her hand reached up, trembling, but Cooper beat her to it. His snout brushed against the fabric and withdrew a small object. A necklace. The kind you'd find in a toy machine, blue string, a cracked plastic heart charm dangling from the end. But the charm had a dried smear of reddish-brown. The room went still. Donna stood. "Your Honor, if I may." Admitted into evidence, Judge Whitlock said, already waving a clerk forward to collect it. Miriam Rowe leaned toward Ellie. Do you know where that came from?" "Honey," Ellie nodded. Her voice was barely audible, but the microphone caught it. It was in the box, under the stairs. It belonged to Jonah. Silence. Donna stepped forward again. Jonah Voss was the child who disappeared 5 years ago. He was last seen playing near the property now owned by Greg Monroe. The color drained from Greg's face. His mouth opened, then closed again. Clara rose in a panic. "Objection denied," Judge Whitlock said. "We will take a recess effective immediately. The court will obtain a forensic analysis of the object and order a search of Mr. Monroe's property." As people stood and buzzed around the courtroom, Logan sat still. Cooper returned to his side tail, wagging once. Logan lowered his hand to the dog's head, the only gesture of gratitude he needed. Outside the courtroom, no one saw Logan smile. But Ellie did. The gray clouds over Hollow Springs had gathered low and heavy by the time Sheriff Donna Keller led her team to the Monroe property. The air was thick with the scent of old pine and coming rain, and the silence that had once clung to the forest now seemed to lean in, listening. There were no press vans this time, no curious neighbors peeking through blinds, just flashing blue lights, uniformed officers, and a truth long buried, finally clawing its way to the surface. Ellie Monroe had broken the courtroom's silence with a trembling voice and a shaking finger. "He locked me down there," she had said, pointing to her uncle, her words slicing through Greg Monroe's carefully rehearsed lies. And that was all it took. Now, Donna stood outside the aging 2-story home, arms crossed her badge glinting dully under the overcast sky. She turned to the officer beside her deputy Rick Alvarez, a stocky man in his early 30s with a buzz cut, sharp eyes, and a mind that ran toward rules. Rick was newer to the department but reliable, the kind of deputy who double-checked every door and filed every report before the deadline. "You have the warrant?" Donna asked. Rick nodded, pulling the folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Signed 10 minutes after the hearing. Based on the testimony and physical evidence from the courtroom, Judge Whitlock fast-tracked it." Donna's voice was low. "Then we go in quiet. No dramatics. This is about the kids." The Monroe house was a relic of forgotten repair. The paint peeled in long strips from the siding, and the porch sagged slightly underfoot. Inside it smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, a mix of time and tension. Donna moved swiftly, scanning each room as they cleared the house floor by floor. It was in the hallway closet where Cooper's instincts came alive. Logan had accompanied the team at Donna's request, not as a suspect anymore, but as a witness and Ellie's protector. He sat in his wheelchair just inside the threshold, his face unreadable, but his eyes missed nothing. Cooper stood beside him, ears forward, nose twitching. The dog walked to the far end of the hall, stopped before a false wall, and sniffed. Then he let out a low, sustained growl. Rick stepped forward, tapping the wooden panel. It echoed hollow. "There's something behind here." It took 20 minutes to remove the screws and pry open the panel. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading downward. No lights, just damp air and silence. They descended with flashlights drawn. At the base of the steps, the cement floor opened into a cramped room. Metal shelves lined one wall. An old mattress lay in the corner, stained and torn. A bucket, a flashlight, and on the opposite wall, chalk markings. Names, 4 of them. 3 partially wiped away, 1 newer. Ellie. Donna knelt beside the names, her hand trembling. My God. Rick stepped into the adjoining crawlspace, flashlight beam dancing over cracked concrete. Tucked into the corner were scraps of fabric, a broken toy car, and most damning, a rusted bracelet engraved with the name Jonah. Cooper stood in the doorway, still and watchful, tail rigid. Logan reached down and touched his head once. Later that evening, back at the sheriff's office, Donna sat before a cluster of screens reviewing what they'd recovered. The forensics team had confirmed trace blood on the necklace from the courtroom and additional DNA on the bracelet that matched the Voss family profile. Greg Monroe was no longer just a suspect. He was a captor, possibly a killer. Donna stared at the evidence, exhausted. She leaned back in her chair and looked up as Logan entered the room. He rolled quietly into the office, a man used to letting presence speak louder than voice. She offered him a tired smile. "We got him, Logan." Logan didn't smile back. He typed briefly on his tablet, then showed it to her. How many others? Donna's expression darkened. "We're reopening files. 2 disappearances from 4 years ago. Mason Briggs and Talia Firth. Both lived within a 10-mile radius. We never connected them to the Monroe property, until now." Logan looked down at Cooper, who rested at his side like a golden statue. Then back to Donna. He typed, "You remember Fallujah?" Donna nodded. She had served briefly as a field medic attached to a joint task force where she first met Logan. Logan typed again. "We missed a signal, lost Drew because of it." Her eyes closed for a moment at the name. Drew Baylor, their translator, 22, the youngest in their unit. Killed during a hostage op because no one spotted the false wall that hid him. "You and Cooper didn't miss the signal this time," she whispered. Logan reached out and touched Cooper's head again. This time, longer, steadier. That night, as the rain finally fell over Hollow Springs, Logan returned home. Ellie was asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around Cooper like he was the last solid thing in the world. Miriam Rowe, now temporarily assigned to monitor Ellie's placement, sat in the kitchen, sipping tea, her round face, drawn from fatigue but kind. "She asked about you," Miriam said softly as Logan entered. "When you'd be back." Logan nodded, then rolled over to Ellie. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. She stirred, but didn't wake. Cooper, now at rest, gave a single, satisfied sigh. Spring rolled into Hollow Springs in muted colors. The snow had melted into memory, replaced by fields of damp grass and early crocuses pushing through the thaw. The mountains still wore a crown of white, but down in the valley, the town was waking up. It had been 6 weeks since the trial, and the buzz had finally quieted. For most of Hollow Springs, life had returned to normal. For Logan Reed, normal would never mean the same thing again. The offers came like a flood in the days after Greg Monroe's arrest interviews, speaking engagements, book deals. One national outlet offered him a 5-figure sum just for an exclusive. They wanted the war hero with the silent dog, the man who had exposed a monster with nothing but a gesture. But Logan declined them all. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He didn't save Ellie for attention. He saved her because no one else had. Instead, Logan did something quieter, something lasting. On a cloudy Tuesday morning, he met Sheriff Donna Keller and Cooper at the edge of an old municipal lot near the edge of town. The building was an abandoned recreation center with boarded windows and vines creeping up the brick. Logan looked up at the faded sign above the door and typed on his tablet. "We could make this something." Donna, dressed in jeans and a brown utility jacket, her badge clipped loosely to her belt, folded her arms. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Silent pause, Logan typed. And that's how it started. They used donated funds from townspeople, a few grants Donna pulled strings for, and the viral momentum still lingering online. Within weeks, the building was cleaned, painted, rewired. They turned the basketball court into a training ring. The old storage room became a therapy space fitted with cushions, blankets, and silence. Veterans from across the state began to arrive, some in wheelchairs, others with tremors in their hands, shadows in their eyes, and stories they hadn't told in years. And the dogs came too, golden retrievers, shepherd's labs, Each one either retired from service or surrendered by overwhelmed families. Cooper, now 9, was the anchor of the program. He didn't need a title. When the new dogs arrived, he walked beside them, slow, steady, reassuring. He taught them not with bark or posture, but by presence, much like Logan. Among the first veterans to join was Micah Donnelly, a 43-year-old Navy vet with a lean frame and tattoos down both forearms. He had close-cropped sandy hair and wore fingerless gloves even in the summer. He rarely made eye contact and never removed his dog tags. Micah had survived a ship fire in Bahrain, but lost most of his unit and suffered partial vocal cord damage from inhaling superheated smoke. He arrived at Silent Paws with a mutt named Skipper, a shaggy one-eyed rescue with a deep bark and a fear of thunderstorms. Cooper bonded with Skipper instantly. Logan noticed how during drills Cooper would stand near Skipper whenever the wind picked up. Just enough to say, "You're not alone." One Saturday morning, Logan sat outside the center under a new wooden sign engraved with the name Silent Paws, where trust speaks louder than words. He watched as Micah ran a leash drill with Skipper and a young female volunteer named Carolyn Trask, a college student with frizzy red curls and freckles like dust on her cheeks. Caroline had a voice like wind chimes and a heart for dogs that defied her 19 years. "Skipper's pulling less," she called across the yard. "He follows Micah's left side now, not the dominant. That's progress." Logan smiled and gave a thumbs up. Cooper sat beside him, tail thumping lightly. Then came the familiar sound, high-pitched laughter, fast little footsteps. Ellie Monroe had arrived. She now lived with the Dalton family, a foster couple who lived on a ranch 20 minutes outside town. Sandra and Blake Dalton were both in their late 40s, patient and kind. Sandra was a school nurse with crow's feet that deepened when she smiled. Blake taught woodworking at the local community college and spoke in soft baritone. They never had kids of their own, but when Ellie arrived, the house shifted, softened like it had been waiting for her all along. Every Saturday, without fail, they brought Ellie to Silent Paws. She jumped down from the truck in rain boots and a yellow backpack waving hard as she ran toward Cooper. The dog rose and met her halfway tail, wagging faster than it had all week. She hugged him tightly, resting her face in the crook of his neck. "I missed you, Coop." Logan watched quietly, his chest warming, with something he'd almost forgotten how to name. Later that week, during Veterans Month at Hollow Springs Elementary, Logan was invited to speak, or rather be present, in front of the 4th grade class. He agreed only after Donna promised to keep it small. Ellie sat in the front row, beaming like a flashlight. Logan wore his dress, blues ironed sharp. Cooper sat beside him wearing his old working harness, not because he needed it, but because it still fit. The teacher, Mrs. Langford, was a willowy woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair tied back in a bun. She introduced Logan as a hero who teaches dogs how to listen and people how to heal. Logan smiled gently and raised his tablet. The screen read, "Sometimes the quietest ones hear the most." For the next 20 minutes, he answered questions from the class by typing responses or letting Cooper demonstrate hand signals. The children watched wide-eyed as Cooper responded to Logan's smallest gestures, sitting lying down, even nudging a tissue box when Logan pretended to cough. Then a boy in the back raised his hand. "Does Cooper understand justice?" The room quieted. Logan looked at Cooper, then at the boy. He typed something slowly. When he turned the tablet around, it read, "No, but he understands truth, and truth never stays silent for long." There was a pause, then clapping. A girl whispered, "That's the best answer I've ever heard." As the children swarmed Cooper afterward, Ellie stood off to the side watching Logan with a look that blended pride and awe. She didn't need to say anything, because truth had been spoken. not with noise, but with a bond that needed no voice. Life lesson from the story. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come in the quiet presence of loyalty and the silent courage of a child, or in the unwavering gaze of a golden-hearted dog. In a world that often rewards the loudest voices, this story reminds us that truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be seen, and love, when rooted in sacrifice, always finds a way to speak. Perhaps it wasn't coincidence that Cooper stood when no one else did. Perhaps it was grace, the kind only God can plant in the heart of those willing to listen, even without words. The bond between Logan and Cooper, the rescue of Ellie, the redemption of a community, all of it bears the fingerprint of a higher hand guiding them home. So let us carry this message into our everyday lives. Pay attention to the quiet ones. Trust the invisible strength of compassion. Be the voice for those who can't speak, and the hands for those who can't reach. Because sometimes being still enough to hear God's whisper is the first step to making a miracle happen. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to join our growing community. And if you believe, as we do, that love, truth, and faith can change the world, then type Amen in the comments, and may God bless everyone who watches this story.